This is HB Vibes, your home for shocking and emotional war stories. Hit like, smash that subscribe, and let's dive into the drama. When Marcus Johnson walked into court dressed in a hoodie, the entire room thought it was a joke. Even the judge laughed, certain he was in over his head. But by the end of the trial, that same judge was left speechless, stunned by the brilliance no one saw coming. The courtroom was alive with whispers, the kind of restless hum that filled the air whenever something unusual was about to happen. Reporters tapped their pens against notepads, lawyers adjusted their ties, and curious onlookers leaned forward in their seats. At the center of it all was a young man who looked nothing like what they expected. Marcus Johnson entered the courtroom not in a sharp-tailored suit, but in a plain black t-shirt layered under a gray hoodie. His jeans were clean but simple, and his sneakers squeaked faintly on the polished floor as he walked forward. The stack of files in his arms looked almost too heavy, but he carried them with steady determination. Some people smirked, others frowned disapprovingly, a few even laughed quietly, assuming Marcus didn't understand the seriousness of where he was. To them, the courtroom was sacred ground, reserved for men and women in suits, speaking in polished tones. Marcus looked like someone who had accidentally wandered in. At the bench, Judge Harrison peered over his glasses. He was a seasoned man with years of experience, known for his sharp tongue and even sharper sense of authority. When his eyes landed on Marcus, a faint chuckle escaped his lips. He leaned forward and asked, "Mr. Johnson, are you sure you want to represent yourself today?" The laughter spread across the courtroom, soft but undeniable. Marcus didn't flinch. He adjusted the files in his arms, stepped to the defendant's table, and set them down with quiet precision. His voice, calm and unwavering, cut through the laughter. "Yes, Your Honor, I am fully prepared." The amusement in the judge's eyes lingered for just a moment longer before he leaned back in his chair. But as the proceedings began, that laughter would soon fade into something else entirely. Marcus's journey to this moment was anything but ordinary. Raised in one of the city's toughest neighborhoods, he grew up in a small apartment with peeling paint and unreliable heating. His mother, Denise Johnson, worked double shifts as a nurse, often coming home long after Marcus was asleep. She never complained, but Marcus saw the exhaustion in her eyes and vowed he would someday ease her burden. As a boy, Marcus wasn't drawn to the games most kids played. While others ran through the streets, bouncing basketballs or riding bikes, Marcus was often tucked away in the public library. The dusty shelves became his sanctuary. He devoured books on history, philosophy, and eventually, law. The first time he read about the Constitution, he was only 12. Something about the word struck him deeply, the idea that justice belonged to everyone, not just the wealthy or the powerful. That spark ignited a fire inside him. But the world around him was not kind. Teachers underestimated him, peers mocked him for carrying books instead of chasing trends, and even family members doubted his seriousness. Still, Marcus held on to his dreams with stubborn resolve. Years later, when he faced legal trouble of his own, Marcus couldn't afford a top lawyer. Many told him he had no chance if he represented himself. But Marcus saw it differently. This was his moment, the chance to prove not just his innocence, but the belief that truth and preparation could stand against wealth and status. From the very start of the trial, the atmosphere was heavy with skepticism. The opposing counsel, a slick attorney named Robert Clay, wore a smug grin as if the outcome had already been decided. He whispered jokes to his colleagues, shaking his head whenever Marcus stood to speak. The jury members seemed uncertain. Some glanced at Marcus with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with outright doubt. They, too, had seen self-represented defendants before, and the results were usually disastrous. Marcus began his opening statement slowly, his voice steady but firm. He didn't use complicated legal jargon or dramatic flourishes. Instead, he spoke plainly, explaining his side of the story with clarity. "I may not have a degree in law," he admitted, "but I have the truth, the evidence, and the determination to show you what really happened." The opposing counsel pounced immediately, interrupting him with objections, mocking his phrasing, and rolling his eyes at the jury. At one point, Judge Harrison himself smirked when Marcus stumbled slightly over a procedural term. The crowd chuckled again, but Marcus never broke. Every night leading up to this trial, he had stayed awake until dawn, cross-referencing statutes, reviewing cases, and practicing arguments in front of his bathroom mirror. He wasn't here to impress, he was here to fight. And as the hours passed, his steady composure began to pierce through the laughter. The breakthrough came on the third day of the trial. Robert Clay had been confident, presenting his evidence and witnesses with the smoothness of a man who had done this hundreds of times before. But Marcus had been patient, waiting for the moment he had prepared for. When his turn came, Marcus walked to the table, picked up a folder from his stack, and pulled out a document. He held it up for the court to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this document was included in discovery but overlooked by the opposing side. What you'll see here changes everything." The courtroom stilled. Even Judge Harrison leaned forward. The document revealed a crucial contradiction in the opposing side's testimony, a detail so important that it unraveled much of their argument. As Marcus explained it, his voice clear and confident, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. Reporters scribbled furiously, the jury leaned in, and Robert Clay's face flushed with frustration. For the first time, the laughter was gone. In its place was silence, heavy with the weight of realization. Marcus wasn't just holding his ground. He was winning. What truly set Marcus apart wasn't just his knowledge, it was his heart. During his closing arguments, he didn't only focus on legal points, he spoke about justice itself. He told the jury about growing up watching his mother struggle, about the nights he spent in libraries instead of playgrounds, about the countless times people told him he wasn't good enough. He shared how he believed the law was meant to protect everyone, not just those who could afford expensive representation. His voice cracked at times, but he never lost control. "This case is not just about me," he said, looking each juror in the eye. "It's about whether truth can stand on its own, without money or influence behind it. It's about whether someone like me, someone who studied because he had no other choice, can still be heard in this room." The jury listened intently. Even Judge Harrison, who had once laughed at him, now watched with a look of quiet respect. The man in the hoodie had turned the courtroom into his stage, not by acting, but by speaking from the soul. The tension in the room was palpable when the jury returned with their verdict. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the foreman handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Harrison. The judge unfolded the document, scanned it, and then read the words aloud. "In favor of the defendant." Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment, the weight of relief washing over him. Around the courtroom, yasps echoed. Some clapped softly despite the decorum, others simply stared in shock. Robert Clay slumped in his chair, disbelief written across his face. The reporters sprang into action, snapping photos and rushing to file stories that would soon spread far beyond the courthouse walls. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. For the first time, his voice carried no trace of amusement. "Mr. Johnson," he said solemnly, "your preparation and presentation were remarkable. You have reminded this court of what justice truly means." Those words struck deeper than the verdict itself. The same judge who had once chuckled at him now spoke with respect. Marcus bowed his head slightly and replied, "Thank you, Your Honor." Marcus's victory became more than a personal triumph. It became a story that inspired many. News outlets ran headlines about the man who had represented himself and won, not with wealth or status, but with sheer preparation and determination. Young people from neighborhoods like the one Marcus grew up in saw his story and believed, maybe for the first time, that they too could rise above their circumstances. Teachers began sharing his story in classrooms, and community centers invited him to speak. Marcus didn't let the attention inflate his ego. Instead, he started mentoring others, teaching them about the importance of education, resilience, and believing in one's worth. "Knowledge," he would tell them, "is the one thing no one can take from you." The judge's laughter had once echoed in that courtroom, but it was Marcus's brilliance and courage that left the lasting mark. His story became a living reminder that sometimes, the most underestimated person in the room is the one who changes everything. And so, Marcus Johnson walked out of that courtroom not just as a man who won his case, but as a symbol of perseverance, proof that true genius is not about appearances, it's about the courage to stand firm when the world doubts you. If you felt the heartbeat of this story, give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to HB Vibes, where every story carries a lesson for the soul.